And the other thing is, like we talked about, the goal is that we shouldn't have to do this all the time. Like, I don't want to have to correct them all the time for stuff.
Right.
So if we could just create that inhibition, then you're going to run much less of a risk of it. So how many dogs do you have?
3.
3.
Come on.
What's up, dogs?
This is the crazy one.
The crazy one.
Yeah.
Is this the
Gator.
this is the one that's starting the problems?
Yeah, she's the dominant one.
Okay. Hello. Where's the third one?
In there.
Okay. All right. So fill me in. What's going on?
She amps everyone up.
Okay.
Like if she's by herself, she really doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
She's just a potato. So the last fight, I was in the backyard,
Mm-hmm.
and the neighbor always lets his dog loose. Ours is 6-foot privacy.
Sure.
But they always like seem to like leave little dookies on that side of the house, even though they have a giant backyard. Anyways, their dog was at the gate. June was like sniffing and barking because we were like, oh.
June or June?
June.
June.
Tilly.
Okay.
So then June was barking, Tilly came bounding over and was like, "Ow," and then jumped on top of June. So I can't remember who reacted.
Sure. Regardless, that's
yeah.
kind of the situation.
Right, yeah.
All right. And that was the first fight, the
Oh,
last
no,
fight.
the last fight. But yeah, they've had a couple of fights where it's been, I haven't been trying to think about the other fights. Like when we first adopted them, like a few months into it, I think, I remember having coffee and like looking back in the backyard and they were fighting and I didn't know who started it. And then the other times that my husband was with them and yeah, he's like, I don't know. Okay.
Sure.
So.
Okay. So have you just had them like totally separated?
No. For like a week they were separated and then they haven't been going out in the backyard together. And then I've been keeping the collar on her.
Mm-hmm. So how bad was the fight that they got in that last week
we
or
all
whatever?
went to the yard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hers weren't bad and then June had, I guess, a big old gacha in her head.
Yeah.
And then her one here too. But everyone got antibiotics.
Yeah. And so how many fights, like in total, would you say that you've had amongst all of them? Or between the two of them or whatever?
Probably 3 or 4.
3 or 4?
Yeah.
And well, I know you said, obviously, he didn't know what exactly happened. You said they were in the backyard the one time. You didn't really know what happened. This one, obviously, the reactivity at the fence line probably was the cause of it. All right. Well, I mean, obviously, I don't know about the other two that you didn't really see, but they're not like horrible by any means, but like just some of the general reactivity and stuff that we're seeing. I mean, that's probably really the root of a lot of your issue.
Yeah.
Like in every situation that we see that dogs are like getting into it with each other, it's typically one dog, quote unquote, like disciplining the other for something that we should be disciplining them for. You know what I mean? Yeah. And if they're repeatedly not seeing us handle those situations, they're going to take it upon themselves. And especially, like, again, I'm team pity. I love pitties. I have 2 of them myself, but like they fight pretty intense, when they get into it, they get into it. Right? So, that rush of adrenaline in those situations where it's like, we're all barking at the fence and it's like, I got to run over there and be a part of it. And suddenly it just turns into a big deal. I mean, listen, like as far as when I say training, I don't necessarily even mean like, oh, do they do all these commands and all this kind of stuff? Yeah. Like we all know, like every time I come to somebody's house, like in a situation like this, the issue is literally never like you need to do more place. You need to do more down, that, right? The issue really is what are they doing when they're not doing those things, right? And what do we need to address of those types of things? So I try to look at, again, like just in general in the home when they're free, what sort of negative things that they do that we have to like go in and look at addressing, right? Yeah. So thing number 1, obviously, people coming in is a little bit chaotic right now, right? It's not horrible. I've walked into houses that are way worse than this before, right? But they're a little like, we got to get them away from the door and it's kind of difficult and this and that, right? They're, barking when they see somebody outside, stuff like that. There wasn't a ton of jumping by any means, but she jumped on me the one time, you know what I mean? Like we want to be in a position to address address all of that kind of stuff just the second that it happens, right? And that means like actually correcting for it in a way where they're going to stop rehearsing it altogether, as opposed to what I see a lot of owners as well as trainers do, which is find themselves in this trap where they're constantly interrupting things, right? You hit this point with your dogs, like with their training, where it's like, well, the training is pretty good and they listen to me for the most part. And if they jump on somebody and I tell them, hey, knock it off, they stop right away. So it's like they kind of just fall into this routine of doing that constantly. You know what I mean? As opposed to, okay, you jumped, even though you stopped the second I told you to, I'm still going to actually go and get that e-collar and give a correction for it, so that it leaves a lasting impression for the next time, right? The goal, I always say, is not that we say no and the behavior stops. The goal is that we don't have to say no in the first place because they stop rehearsing the behavior altogether, right? And again, everybody does it. We see dogs go home from board and train, they come back the next week and they're like, things are great. I tell them no and I don't even need to hit the button. That's like literally verbatim what I hear people say all the time. And same deal, I always say you have to still give that correction, because the reason why they're responsive to that in that moment is because it's become a condition. They know it predicts correction, right? So if that correction goes away, one, the no loses its value, and two, it just becomes an interrupter, right? Which we don't want to interrupt, we want to inhibit. Very good. I'll take it. Cool, you can come back in here and then release her. So this seems good. I mean, she seems like she got a pretty good idea of what to do as far as that's concerned.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny, like I said, as soon as you messaged me about this, I was like, I feel like you really don't need that much training. I think you need to probably just get on them a little bit more over stuff.
She's been watching too much true crime TV.
Yeah, right.
I would agree. We just let it go too often, and we're not strict enough with them. Sometimes we are, and then we let it slip, and then.
Well, the one thing I was telling her before you came down was a lot of cases, crawling off of the bed. In a lot of cases like this, it's not so much that you need to do more commands and stuff. Like, obviously, I want you working this when guests are coming in, so there's a little bit more control, obviously. But when you guys are just hanging out, like, I don't give a shit if you're doing bed stays or down stays or anything like that. But the big trigger seems to be that when one or some of them start reacting at something or getting really amped up and rehearsing something they shouldn't be doing, she wants to come in and play police. And her way of playing police is go over and start a fight, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that just tells us, obviously we need to hold her to a little bit higher of a standard and be in a position to correct for that. But we need to figure out, why is she feeling like she needs to be the one disciplining the dogs? That should be our job, right? Now, what's their behavior like with each other as far as like their relationship just in general?
Loving. Like,
they're pretty good with each other.
She's like licking her and
Do they like play and stuff, or?
June's not a super playful dog with Tilly. I think she's submissive to Tilly.
Sure.
I know she is submissive to Tilly.
She's
got her ass kicked a couple times, unfortunately, but.
And she gets, so I remember at one point in the fight, I was I don't know, I got Tilly off, and then June, I didn't have a hand on June or whatever, but June came over and went chomp, chomp, chomp.
Yeah.
I had no idea, because, like, he came home
Sure.
and got them off me, so I didn't see what happened, was the aftermath. And when he brought her home, and I was like, there's nothing on her neck.
Yeah.
And so June was like, stop it!
Yeah.
But yeah, she doesn't have much energy, like,
June does play with every other dog that comes over, plays well with every other dog.
She's pretty social.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
She'll play for about, like, a minute and a half, and she's like, okay, that was good.
Yeah, social with the cats, too.
Yeah.
But, just, I think she understands that Tilly could murder her.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the positive of this whole situation is just them hanging out. Like, there's clearly not any, like, grudginess or anything like that. Because obviously once it hits that point, that's when it gets really hard.
Right.
But, you know, those kind of, like, isolated incidents that, like, can be clearly pinned down to a trigger, it sucks still. I mean, obviously we don't want our dogs getting in fights with each other, but it's much easier to look at it and be like, this is how I prevent this moving forward, you know? So. All right, so we'll give them a minute here. What we're gonna do next is I wanna take a look at doorway stuff from the standpoint of, I'll probably have Paige go outside, knock on the door, see what they do, and kind of go from there. Again, I'm not concerned about him just yet here, but I wanna see what they do as far as that. No. So those, and you could tell even that. So interestingly enough, I don't know if you saw when she went rushing over there, June actually got pretty hyped from that.
Yeah.
Like, see the hair went up a little bit and stuff. So it's kind of going both ways. You could tell from the standpoint of, like she's trying to check her for stuff and she's also probably trying to check her for stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you had kind of mentioned, right, you thought she was maybe a little bit more submissive to her.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes, you know, it's not so much the case.
When they come outside,
Yeah.
Tilly will get amped up, usually by the squirrels.
Yeah.
And June will follow Tilly and like try to chomp at her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So that's a kind of an opposite dynamic than we thought, right?
I guess sometimes I just have a, you know, more angelic idea of my favorite.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I've run into this situation like maybe 3 times in the last week of people in your situation that I've talked to, of dogs getting into fights with each other and them thinking it's this dog's problem and it's this dog's problem, you know?
You know, it might, because like if I'm petting Tilly,
Sure.
sometimes June will try to jump up on Tilly and try to help her.
Ah, yeah. So those are all things, right, that are contributing to this issue of why are they competing with each other so much?
Yeah.
Because we're not stopping it, right?
Yeah.
So we want to definitely be in a position to start actually disciplining for some of those types of things. So the attention is off of each other so much with that kind of concept, and a little bit more onto you guys. I mean, I could see I could see how this would just build up into something like that,
Yeah.
right? You said even the situations when you didn't see what was going on outside, right? Just that alone, if we weren't here, that same situation could have happened. And if for whatever reason, you know, she was really amped, she came over to check her and she decided she didn't like that, that would have turned into a fight,
Yeah.
you know? And typically with this kind of stuff, I really don't play around with the corrections. Like that was 100 that I corrected her at right there.
Okay.
So I want to just get it under control is
Yeah.
kind of my philosophy with
Yeah.
this, you know?
I think, yeah, in my past training, like, I'm like, oh, my correction's 20,
Sure, sure.
30, like.
Listen, teaching stages is a whole different conversation, right? That's where you get into, like, I know even Scott is that way with like real low levels with stuff and you know what I mean? And that's obviously if we're introducing the tool, that's one thing. We're trying to teach the dog how to do something with a tool, that's one thing. But when we're trying to create an inhibition for something, the risk of being too low is nagging the dog, pissing them off even more and causing them to need a higher level next time. The risk of being too high is more quickly suppressing the behavior and maybe they're a little apprehensive for a couple minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So basically much less risk in overcorrecting for it than undercorrecting for it, at least when it comes to like safety-based things like this.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing is, like we talked about, the goal is that we shouldn't have to do this all the time. Like I don't want to have to correct them all the time for stuff.
Right.
So if we could just create that inhibition, then you're gonna run much less of a risk of it. I'm seeing dose problem childs. Right.
My June!
Yeah, so I mean, listen, they're not horrible by any means, right? And none of this stuff is coming from this malicious place, right?
Yeah.
But you could tell this one gets overstimulated as fuck, like really easily, right? So like the squirrel stuff, like just how quick she went from like 0 to 60, like going for it, right? Obviously the energy at the front door, stuff like that. And in her case,
She real wild when you guys came in.
not like over the top by any means, but like really just needing to like hold her back like as I'm coming in and stuff, right? That's where like the bed stay will help with that, right?
Yeah.
I'm more so concerned about, like I said, some of that arousal stuff in the yard and things like that. And then you could tell she's big time police officer, right? Some of that like whatever defensive barking stuff she was doing over here, right? June wasn't really even doing that, or sorry, Tilly wasn't really doing that. June was the one really doing that, right?
Yeah.
She gets real defensive over Kristen too, because like
June does?
Kristen and June will be like sitting in here,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll walk in from like the bathroom or something, and I'll surprise her, and she'll howl at me like.
Yeah, that you got to get that stuff under control, right? So I think this is really a multi-dog process, right? Of she gets overstimulated and is probably getting set off by her kind of behaviors, right? That's amping her up a little bit. And then additionally, right, her kind of attitude or whatever you want to call it is causing her to try to play police officer towards Tilly. So I think you got to really focus on for a couple weeks getting those things under control. He seems just aloof, you know, like I'm not concerned about him. I'm really not. I'm concerned about their dynamic from that standpoint, especially if like she really is like your, you know, we got to make sure, again, that's great. I'm glad that you guys have that relationship, but she's got to cool it with some of that like over kind of adrenalized defensive stuff.
Gotcha.
So I wouldn't be playing around with the corrections. Like I said, just get this stuff under control. Spend the next like 3 or 4 days, e-collars on them anytime you're in the house, any of that nonsense, we're shutting it down right away.
Okay.
Right? And I really don't think that you'll have any issues past that. So, you know, again, these are isolated incidents that are over specific things, and we clearly can see what the problem is, you know? So it's not like it's this random thing coming out of nowhere.
Walks have been a big improvement.
Yeah, walks have been fantastic, yeah.
Okay, so your biggest goals with him, like I'm hearing, just kind of listening around distractions and when you have guests over.
Number one is
Okay.
just listening around distractions.
Okay.
That's probably his
Yeah,
biggest pitfall.
yeah. I think it's definitely good to start pushing that a little bit by, like you said, you went to the pet store today and start doing more trips like that. Home Depot might be a little bit more up your alley as people aren't, a pet store, people are gonna like swoon over your dog all the time. And often, like, the aisles are a little bit more narrow, we could see other dogs, but a Home Depot trip might be something good to do with him, to start implementing him around distraction, loud noises, loud sounds, and still be able to have that control over him. And just asking what you need from him, so that would just probably be not pulling for you, and like being able to down with some of those drills. And then when your friends are over, the best course of action, honestly, would be to not have him on the couch when people are over, even if people are like encouraging him. Generally, rule of thumb, I'll try to keep my dogs off of the couch completely when I have guests over, because you're right, like not everybody likes dogs. He's not as small as he used to be. People might have loved him when he was a tiny little puppy, and then he gets on, especially with the intensity that you're speaking about. I bet he's just like, gets really hyped up. You probably have those friends that hype him up.
Yeah, that's, people get excited to see him, and he'll do like bed stays, and then if I'm not paying attention, he'll like army crawl like 10 feet slowly.
Sure.
So that's I don't know if I always correct it or not. That's kind of one that I sort of.
Yeah, I definitely correct him.
And he knows it too. I mean, the moment I just look at him.
Is it funny? Yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it's funny that they like try to sneak off, but when you're doing training, ideally you want to correct him every single time he gets off the bed, so he can always depend that the consequence will be the same, and it's not like, well, sometimes I can do this, other times I can't, and then when you do enforce it, sometimes it can be a little bit more confusing because he's just not, we're not doing consistently. So an option would be to put him on the bed stay, have your guests come in, you know, everybody can greet him, he just can't jump on them, keep him maybe off the couches, and when you're ready to like just be with your friends, pop him on a bed stay and you correct him anytime he got off. And try to stay like really consistent about it.
That's usually what I try to do, but sometimes like if I'm hosting, it just gets
Sure,
hectic.
I know, yeah.
And I'm not paying attention.
Is it possible for you to utilize a crate when guests are over, when you're just not
Yeah,
feeling?
I could. He loves his crate.
Sure.
It's crate command. He's like 100%. I just walk by the room and he'll walk in it.
Luckily, like, he's a very friendly dog, and he's just like a good charismatic boy that everybody probably wants to pet. But when you are hosting things and you're like, I just want to be with my friends, I don't want to train my dog right now, I don't want to have to worry about him getting into things or getting off the bed, it's always an option to be able to crate them. He doesn't have to be a part of your every single day life. He can come out for a little bit, do his greeting, go back in his crate and rest, so you feel like you can fully enjoy your friends. And you're not worried that you're constantly have to micromanage a dog and try to hang out with your friends. And you just want to separate those two things a little bit more. Do another down here. Perfect. And if you feel comfortable dropping your leash again. He seems like very responsive. And the first time you say the command, I haven't noticed you having to repeat your commands at all, which is really good. So it's just primarily just the duration of the command sometimes. Start like pumping out some longer term ones. If you go to the park, put him down at like at Edgewater picnic table and start having him practice a little bit more long term with like everything going by. Additionally, like near that playground at Edgewater might be a good option for him to kind of sit and watch. Going back to the pet store, repeating the session you did with just a little bit more consistency. I think his training looks incredible. Like, he looks very solid in the store. Engagement's good. The downs look awesome. So you have him in a really good spot. It's those tiny little details that cleaning up. I think you'll have a dog that you can more easily enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the big things we talked about the last time or the time before, whatever situation it was like in that scenario, like out the window, right? Correcting, but then going into it with the expectation that maybe you need to correct 4 times, 5 times, something like that, right? Have you done that? Where are you at, you know, as far as that's concerned, would you say?
So there was one incident where he escalated after we tapped him.
Sure.
But then I've had other instances where I tap him once and
Yep.
he comes finds me in the office.
Yeah.
Which is working, you know,
Yeah.
some of the time.
Yeah. Well, so that's what I mean, though, in the situations where, so like, yeah, I mean, obviously, if he's not quite as amped up or whatever, if you give one correction, he might stop faster, right? But in the situation where he fights back on it, because the escalation, or whatever you want to call it there, is just him frustrated and saying, no, I don't want to listen, I want to keep doing this, right? So that's where we need to say, like, no, still can't do it, right? And then if he does that again, no, still can't do it, right? So have you run into a situation where you've seen that, right, where he's pushed back, and then you followed through and corrected a handful of times after that? And if so, what did you notice then at that point? Or have you not really?
I don't know that we've gotten that far because the situation usually just ends. Like the dog walking by is gone. So.
Hello? No.
No.
Now grab that remote, give a tap on it.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Did you tap it? You didn't?
No, I didn't.
Oh, tap it. No.
No,
I did.
And did you just turn it down?
I did.
Oh, that thing needs to be
60.
way, yeah, I mean, go back up to, I don't know, 80, 90, something like that. So,
Any issues come up?
all right. Yeah, so those things too, like forget the look, like at this point again, like we talked about, we want to capitalize on those scenarios,
Okay.
right? Like suddenly he's just like, oh, I'm going to jump all over you and just kind of be a butthead, right? Like obviously he's excited and I'm happy he's excited, but we want him keeping it under control in those situations, right? No.
No.
And then give a tap. There you go. And that was better that time. He cared more about that one, right? So, good.
He did walk in, and you were doing training right there.
Yeah.
And perfect.
Yeah, and-
so it's
And
getting
that
better.
on-off switch in his mind, right? That just has to do with the fact that he knows he's not getting away with it here. You know what I mean? Like at this point, it is well established when he comes here, that stuff doesn't fly, right? So we need to get that same thing at home. And the reason for it is because we know we're going to be really persistent regardless of the situation, right? Any of that kind of stuff we're going to correct right away, right? Any nonsense at home we're going to correct right away, et cetera, right? So he's got to realize that you guys are going to truly follow through and commit with those things to get him past it, right? And I know, you know, obviously if a dog's just walking by, he's barking out the window, the dog's going to pass by at some point and then it's going to be all fine, right? And he's going to chill out. But we want to make sure, you know, typically, let's say this is the window here, right? Dog's walking by, bark, 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 bark. He's freaking out at the dog. Dog walks by. Even when the dog gets out of sight for a second, they're usually still amped for a second. You know what I mean? It's not like it immediately, as soon as the dog is out of eyesight, they're like, oh, I'm a calm dog again, right? So even if that dog's no longer present, if he's even not barking, but he's still at the window, like kind of hot, we're still going to correct for that. We want to see him totally disengage from whatever it is that he's doing over there. Additionally, another thing I would look at or look for is, do you notice in the house that he'll ever like go and sit by the window and like almost seem like he's like looking for something?
Yeah, upstairs.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe not, right? But like sometimes what we'll notice is that before the dog ever actually even sees the trigger and starts freaking out at it, what they'll do is they almost expect it, and they'll go to the window and just kind of like be looking around, like waiting for a dog to walk by and waiting to start reacting, right? So in a lot of cases, if I notice that, I'll nip that in the butt also, right? So I won't let him persist with that behavior because we know what it's going to escalate to.
Okay.
You know, there's a difference between him just like lounging by the window and like truly not giving a shit about what's going on outside, and him just like at the window like squirrel, dog, deer, you know what I mean? Like looking for something, right? So if you notice that, that's something else I would correct for, and I would still be just as firm about that correction with it, right?
Yeah, so I will say that a lot of times he's a single bark or
Sure.
a single growl now, less prolonged.
So it's a little
inside.
bit, subdued.
But I guess
We don't,
continue.
yeah, because, right, so if we look at all those types of things, that's the sequence of escalation, right? So sequence of escalation, meaning these are the steps he cycles through before he gets to the big response. So we've taken it from here to here, right? So we want to take it from here to here, right? So yeah, if you notice him even do the single bark or even do the growl, we want to correct for that because that's going to be easier to address than the big explosion, and it's going to, again, continue to reduce that even more.
Very good.
So focus on those things too, right? And again, just still make sure you're being just as firm on those things. And other things, right? Like, so like the jumping and stuff like we just saw right there, right? If you notice anything like that at home, like when one of you gets home or whatever, I want you being even extra. Don't worry about like turning that level down or anything. We want to make sure at this point, because he knows what's expected, right? He knows he shouldn't be doing that in that moment, right? So we want to make sure the consequence is motivating enough where it sticks to the next time. You're good.
Pizza.
See ya. All right, I'll take the remote from you. And why don't you go ahead and just drop the leash to start. And you can tell him okay.
Okay. I recommend, like my sister's bringing her dog home at Christmas, when introducing him to dogs, just kind of, you know, a little standoffish sometimes. Like, is there a good way to introduce them?
Yeah, I mean,
Not just like,
yeah. So generally speaking, if I'm going to introduce my dog to a new dog, my first box that I need to check is that I have total control of my dog around that trigger wherever it is I'm going to be socializing them. So if it's at the house or in their backyard or something like that, I'm going to make sure that I can get them to do some commands and focus in around that other dog, right? That's why we always start with like a down stay or a bed stay or something like that, right? Once I've checked that box and he seems relatively chill, then we start the introduction process, and then the kicker is just we can't have any resources for there to be competition, right? No food, no toys, no affection, right? From there, let them do their thing. Usually if you're a little uncomfortable or something like that, you can drop a leash, let it drag in case you need to grab it, have your e-collar set all the way up, obviously, and then just supervise, right? Nobody interact with the dogs or anything like that. Make sure nobody's, oh, you look so cute, googly eyeing and getting them all wound up or anything like that. We're simply here to supervise, make sure everything goes well. And then the last thing is we end on a good note, right? And we typically don't do it very long. So I usually recommend first couple times, 30 to 45 minutes, no longer, right? Nice and supervised, and on a positive note. I think where most things go wrong is where people do it for way too long, right? They do it for an hour, they do it for 3 hours, and it's like for the first 45 minutes, dogs do pretty good, right? We're supervising, we're doing our part, and then once you hit that hour mark, we kind of start spacing out, right? We're chit-chatting with each other, no longer watching the dogs, and then suddenly we miss something and something happens, you know?
so if they're staying at the same house over the holidays, they just keep.
You got to figure out a way to,
For a while.
yeah, you got to figure out a way to structure it out where you can give them breaks.
Okay.
Inside, a preference over outside.
As far as introducing them?
Yeah.
No, you know, I just want it to be a somewhat open area. So like if it's like, you know, some of these houses, these living rooms that are like 3 square feet, you know, like that's obviously not going to be a great place for them to interact and socialize. Some people's houses just very congested. There's a lot of corners and stuff they can get tied up in. Sometimes that's not super conducive, right?
Somewhere where they can get away.
Yeah, somewhere they can move and create some distance if they need to and not feel super trapped.
He kind of does a little bit of this with our neighbor's dog,
Yeah.
but other than that, that's about it.
It's got to get you some friends, Hubert.
Yep.
What does this paw move? Yeah.
Bed.
Hey, there we go. All right. The social looked really good today, I thought. You know, like one little hiccup in the middle, but I thought he really started to open up. That looked great. The commands and stuff with the dog distractions, obviously put a little work into that, but all in all wasn't too bad. I really want to see just that, the rest of that reactivity get under control for you guys, you know? I think a lot of it is just going to be really following through, trying to get it really dialed in. You know, you could implement your pet corrector some places, e-collar some places, obviously. And if for whatever reason we're still having an issue with it, got a couple other little things we could do to like dial it in. But I think this is going to be more of just that mindset of just really getting it under control than anything. Because he's proven to us consistently, like, he could turn it off. So, you know what I mean? Like, he knows when he can do it, when he can't do it, right? So I think that's going to be a lot of it for sure. You know, he might be still a little out of the swing from getting back, but you know, all in all, I'd like to see that get just a little bit better. You know, and then obviously we want to keep, you know, moving the socialization in the right direction.